Is my baby by and by.
Next Friday, we look beyond the Hollywood legend of Marilyn Monroe, whose extraordinary and exotic charisma set her on a public pedestal that overshadowed her great but fragile talent.
Welcome back. It's a quarter of a century since the news of Marilyn Monroe's death shocked her millions of fans worldwide. Since then, her life and image have been examined time and time again, perhaps more than any other film idol. To the world at large, her acting was always secondary. For them, she was the original sex goddess. Her legend is unfading. If anything, grows with the passage. It grows with the passage of time. David Foster reports.
Had Marilyn Monroe lived, the question today might have been, Marilyn who? She was never a great actress. Quite good, yes, but tempestuous, unreliable, and surely it was argued never likely to last. But last she has done, if only in the public's imagination. As one American commentator said after her death,
though she brought joy and warmth and laughter to tens of millions, she found little joy herself.
Norma Jean Baker would have been 61. She probably wouldn't have been happy. Everything she did successfully was done with the feeling that something equally disastrous was to follow. From a broken home, Miss Baker went from ward of court to sailor's wife to Marilyn Monroe to star of 20th Century Fox. They dropped her, Columbia collected her, and put her in her first major role.
Thank you. I've been planning for a week what I'd say when I met you.
And what did you decide?
I hadn't decided yet. Miss Martin, Miss Martin.
Yes, Mr. Carroll?
Would you go to dinner with me?
I'd love to.
Back to 20th Century Fox, she took a second husband, baseball star Joe DiMaggio. She entertained troops in Korea, but never really lost the plastic publicity image.
I want to thank the editors of Photoplay magazine and all of the public. I thank you very much.
Another new husband in 1956, playwright Arthur Miller, and the same year a trip to London where Miss Monroe met the Queen. But the cracks were beginning to show. Aged 34, she was undergoing psychiatric treatment. The film offers were drying up. Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe split up. And then in 1962, Marilyn Monroe died, a drugs overdose. This was her biggest starring role. Did she kill herself? Was she killed? Was she having affairs with Jack and Bobby Kennedy? 25 years on, there's still no answer. And one of her best-known songs is still perhaps the most...
Marilyn Monroe, it's 25 years ago since she died. The latest book about Marilyn's life and death is The Marilyn Scandal, and it's published on August the 6th. The author, Sandra Shevey, is with us this morning. Good morning to you, Sandra. Why did you decide that we needed another book, yet another book about Marilyn Monroe?
Well, I felt really that nothing about her had really been written. In other words, the true Marilyn Monroe was so obscure and so obscured that I felt, I really should put down the anecdotes, the reminiscences of people who knew her, whom I knew when I worked in Hollywood from '72 until '81. And, there are many myths we refute in the book, and I just have made a couple of notes because I did want to sort of get to them. For instance, the myth that she was a home wrecker, which was very prevalent during the whole Arthur Miller romance, was quite untrue. The same thing with the Yves Montand affair, where she was accused, again, of being a home wrecker. The fact they had said that she was unclean, this was another myth, the fact that she was filthy and sloppy and this and that had a lot more to do with the fact of the way she dressed, and that she repudiated dressing well, and she repudiated all the middle-class values. And so, they sort of turned it against her and said that she was unclean, when she simply was unkempt in the way that, that we know it to be. The fact that she was promiscuous, the whole Bobby Kennedy thing that was dragged in to sort of discredit the romance with John Kennedy we go into, and show, in fact, that she was not having an affair with Bobby Kennedy at all, but he was simply he was dispatched to her home that fatal day to sort out the relationship that she had, or that had been terminated by his brother.
What involvement do you think the Kennedys had with her death?
Well, in fact, you know, we do quote the deposition, Bobby Kennedy's deposition, the police deposition, which states, in fact, that he went to the home with the doctor, that he held Marilyn Monroe while the doctor injected the tranquilizer, and that she struggled, and that she clawed at him, and in fact, you know, and that is it. So he was very much involved with her death. And Jack Clemens, the sergeant who was the first man on the scene, in fact, believed that it was perhaps a murder, either accidental or not.
Were you happy with the verdict, or do you think she
was
murdered?
No, of course well, I think, you know, I think the only reason we'd ever get the case reopened, the only way the case would ever be reopened, and I do feel it should be reopened, is if the housekeeper, who admitted in 1985, after keeping silent for many years, that she was there at the time of Bobby Kennedy's visit, were to come forth with a police deposition and tell us, or let us say, remember more than she has remembered in the past. In other words, her memory as she gets older seems to increase rather than decrease. And so if she has full recall this year or next year and goes to the police with a full statement of events on that tragic afternoon, we will in fact, I would think, have the case reopened, and there very well might be a disavowal of the suicide myth.
Very briefly, if she was still alive, she'd have been 61, wouldn't she? Would she have been as glamorous a pensioner as she was a sex goddess when she died?
Shelley Winters is still working. You know, I mean, I don't think, you know, I mean, Joseph Mankiewicz said to me when I interviewed him for this book, said, well, you know, she was old, she was fat, and she was unloved. Well, I think, you know, that's quite untrue. You know, she had a very hard time. I mean, Hollywood never wanted her. Darryl Zanuck never wanted her. The directors never wanted her. When an Englishman, one of your fellows, Roy Baker, came to Fox to work with her, he said to me when I interviewed him for this book, well, she was washed up by that time. This is when she'd barely begun. She hadn't even become a superstar. She was washed up by that time. In other words, no one wanted her. She was a kind of person, because she seemed terribly sort of adjusted, but was in fact quite, I wouldn't say maladjusted, but certainly independent. For that reason, because she came onto the set, even when she was a starlet with two coaches in tow, two female coaches in tow, and she would never okay a scene or not make a fuss or fudge a scene unless those two coaches did a nod and they said it was all right. In other words, she was a problem. She was one of the first women to have a woman's point of view. It was quite rare.
Well, she was a legend as well.
Well, she certainly has become a legend, that's obvious. That's why we're talking about her now, isn't it? Really?
And that is why she's become the legend.
Okay, let's just talk to, well, one legend. Let's talk to a great British entertainer who's been sitting and listening to the interview with Sandra, Shevey. And I know that you have your own feelings about Marilyn Monroe, don't you? And not only that, you've met her.
Well, what is the great feeling, and I do appreciate very much what this marvellous lady has said about her. You see, it's sort of contradictory in a way when they say Hollywood said she's washed up. When you find a lady that when we show her old films that people are glued to the screen, a legend. I couldn't care less what Hollywood said. Hollywood is contradictory anyway. It's destroyed more people than it ever made. This was a great lady, an individual, a legend. No book and no film will ever destroy the fact that she was wonderful, a great comedian. People didn't realize. You watch some of her little films. I watched All About Eve the other night. She was only on screen for about 6 minutes. Great actress, great fun. I don't care how long it took for her to be portrayed on that screen.
She worked very hard. I think this is something I point out in the book. I mean, she did mime, she studied acting. All the times that they were saying, you know, she was seeing this one and she was sleeping around and this and that was totally untrue. She was very unsociable. She didn't see the way to fame and fortune by marrying Clark Gable as his 10th wife or something like that. She was always studying. You could never get her out of the house. She was always taking classes, using every penny she ever spent to study acting, mime, dance, fencing. I mean, she was a consummate student, and it shows. Her work shows.
Okay,
Sandra
we'll read all
Shevey,
about it
in the Marilyn Scandal.
Sandra
Shevey, published on August the 6th.
We're talking about great people, but look, we have evidence here of a great honour handed out to one of our great British entertainers. We heard the thank you both for joining us, by the way. Thank you, Sandra. Good luck with your book. The reappraisal of Marilyn Monroe, a great talent. And Daniel LaRue, you don't need thanks, do you? Because you've got it made.
I'm delighted. And I can't wait to read this book.
We heard about Bournemouth weather. Now for the British weather.
Now for the British weather. Thank you, Mike. Good morning again. Talking of Marilyn Monroe, I did some photographs for a newspaper yesterday, and they tried to get the old wind machine blowing up the skirt, and I just thought, no, this one's definitely been done before. Right, the weather for this morning.
No one can create an illusion better.